Maryborough suited us. There's so many things going for Maryborough. And one thing that's where people that have not lived anywhere else or have not travelled, etc., I don't think they appreciate a place like Maryborough. Maryborough, if you have a look from a planning perspective, an environmental perspective, a whole load of pluses are there. And it's got so many pluses, but people don't understand or accept that. Certainly town planners don't. If you have a look at the development in Hervey Bay and compare it with what has happened in Maryborough, 100 odd years ago when it was laid out, it got everything going for it. The houses were built for the climate.
Yep.
You've got all the things they talk about environment, low carbon footprint and all these feel-good things. This was done over 100 years ago, certainly 50 years ago. Why people don't emulate that in this day and age is beyond me.
Yep.
So, yes, and to see kids walking to school. One of the first things we saw where we lived, kids walking down the road with a fishing rod.
Yeah.
To me, that's part of a community. It was a community type that I lived in.
Yep. Well, today on Chris Loft Conversations, we've got Dave Barracliff, one of our local identities, as he is a genuine concerned citizen. So I look forward to the conversation. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Chris.
Yeah.
First of all, let me apologise for my mongrel accent, but I am here by choice and not an accident of birth.
Okay, thank you. And so you're amongst friends. We're just relaxed. We're going to enjoy this conversation. One of the criteria, the only criteria we have, is that we tell the truth, or at least we don't lie. Okay, you comfortable with that?
More than comfortable.
Yeah, good. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning. Where were you born, and who to, and take it from there.
Well, I was born in the UK when the Nazis were still dropping bombs. I was born at Burton-on-Trent, which is a brewery town, but I was raised to start off with in South Derbyshire, in the South Derbyshire coal mines. That area is known for coal and clay, and is a product of the Industrial Revolution. So from that upbringing, and then moving into another county called Warwickshire, as they would be my most formative years. Later on in life,
just back to there. The mum and dad, what did they do? Mum
okay.
and brothers and sisters.
Well, my mother, I would say, was born at least 50 years too late because she was very Victorian in many of her attitudes. Her father was a small businessman. He had an ironmongery business. My father was a master butcher and a licensed slaughterman. At the outbreak of war, he shut his business and he served 6 years in the British Army. After the war, he bought another business in a little place called Furness End in Warwickshire, which is about 20 miles from Birmingham. Later on, we moved back to Derbyshire, where I did my primary education.
Just in a local state school or a church school?
My first school was, although it was a state school, was originally a church school, and I can remember one of the things was the school was at the edge of the graveyard, and we were told you do not look into the graveyard when they're conducting a funeral or a burial. So this is just after the war, when there was a whole load of things, social things happening, things like school milk, having to drink a third of a pint of milk every day. It was compulsory. no ifs and buts. So it was formative, but there was a lot of social change, certainly through the early mid to late 40s. And I guess that some of those traits are still following through even to today.
So that's school. So you Dad went off to war.
Yes.
You were born there. Sorry, what year were you born?
I was born in 43.
Yep.
Dad was demobbed late 45. Said we moved to Warwickshire in 46. We stayed there till 1950. And so
brothers and sisters.
I have a sister, Pam. She was born in 1948. She now lives in Canada. But then we moved back to Derbyshire, or right on the borders of Burton on Staffordshire, back in about 1950, and I went through primary school between there and 1954. In 1954, we moved to a place on the edge of the Cotswolds called Witney, which is about 12 miles from Oxford.
They're all great English names, aren't they? It's like listening to Midsummer Murders or something. All the towns. And so that was 1954?
1954, and then I basically did my secondary education.
At the local...
I went to two schools, but my last school was what had the title of the West Oxfordshire Technical College.
And that's technical, being more hands-on?
More hands-on as opposed to the local grammar school.
Yep.
So I guess that was more the way that I was thinking. Language and literature wasn't my forte. So I was more of a practical, and still am a practical person, and a logical person, as opposed to a theoretical person.
Yep. So left school, or did you have jobs at school, or work in Dad's business, or?
Oh, working in Dad's business, I can go right back till 1947. After the war, there was still rationing, etc. And
just explain a bit of rationing for people. Like what was rationing?
Well, it was exactly that. You were the government was rationing what you could buy, food-wise and even clothing-wise, because obviously the war disrupted normal commerce. So people couldn't buy what they wanted. They were basically told what you could buy. So there was a whole load of scale of economies. But Dad used to slaughter pigs on the weekend, where the local villagers would raise pigs on farmers' unuseful properties, and on a Saturday, on the Saturday the people would bring the pigs and they would store them in our outbuildings, and then Dad would start slaughtering on a Saturday and all through the Sunday, and he would slaughter up to 20 pigs. And of course I was in the middle of it, with all the blood and gore, etc., etc. But I knew nothing else. So I always thought I was helping, but I'm sure I was more of a hindrance than a help. But it was just part of life.
So he'd slaughter the pigs for the community.
No, they would slaughter it for individuals within the community. And at that time, the deal was, every pig he slaughtered was £1 money, a joint of the pig, and the pig's blood. For the pig's blood, he used to make small goods, especially black puddings, brawn, and all those sort of things, when there was nothing left to waste in those days. Food and waste were the opposite end of everything. So I guess I could see that if you worked hard, you got rewards. So I guess they were formative years. They were good years. But they were one of those things that, you know, I was made to stand up on my own 2 feet. And that was where it went on for. You mentioned about jobs. Well, when I was 13, I started a paper round in the morning before schools. And the system there, you had to have approval from the Education Authority to have a paper round because you were working before school. So
it's age 13.
At age 13, I delivered newspapers 6 days a week. Now, again, this is where the variations between what happens in Australia to England. The paper boy delivered your newspapers and all your magazines and your comics and put them through your letterbox, not throw it over the fence. Now, for which I got the princely sum of 11 shillings a week.
That wasn't bad.
No, but then I was wanting more money, so I had got the job for 15 shillings a week of putting the newspapers up for the other boys and the paper boys. So that increased my income to 26 shillings a week. Then when Dad's Saturday morning van boy left, I stepped into the place. So I delivered meat on a Saturday morning for Dad, and 2 mornings a week. So I had this butcher's bike with a big basket on the front, so I was delivering meat and delivering newspapers. So that was how I started. I would put at least half of my money away saving, and the rest was my pocket money. In other words, I earned my pocket money, it wasn't given.
Right. So you would have been quite well off compared to other kids, sort of, or didn't notice? I mean, because you had a bit of spending money.
Well, no, there was other kids that I went to school with also had jobs. But we all seemed to, most of us. No, I hate using this word wealth or money or anything like that. It is irrelevant. No, I've never ever thought or even looked at it. I was always well looked after as far as provided for by my parents. I was always taught to be clean and tidy, etc., etc. Clean shoes before I went to school and all that, you know. So I don't think there was anything different from a whole load of people. Far from it.
So you finished your year schooling, your secondary, year 12 or whatever it was?
Well, okay, fifth form, I was 16 and a half.
So it's year 11. Year 11, yep.
What the system was then, in those days, again, there are differences, so trying to explain the differences. The college I went to, they basically would find you a job, so you had a job to go to when you left school. But in my particular case, it was not quite straightforward as that, because I declined two jobs. One was as a technical illustrator and one was as a draftsman. And we went through an interview process with the principal and the deputy principal. And, excuse me, and I was quizzed about why I wouldn't accept the jobs. And I said, well, I couldn't imagine being cooped up in an office. You know, I wanted to be, it was too confining from me. Now, the deputy principal, whom I had a great deal of respect for, was a guy called Bob Warner. And we had a couple of discussions, and I wasn't exactly the model student.
Mm.
And he said, "Have you ever thought about being a police cadet?" And I said, "I beg your pardon." Well, he also knew that I tried to join. I wanted to join the army as a boy soldier, but my parents refused to allow me to go. So he had an inkling that I wanted to see the big wide world and do other things. So he said, "Have you?" And I said, "I've never thought about it." He says, "Well, you have had experience with the police force, haven't you?" and I, oh geez, remember that. I'd have to go back about 12 months prior to that, when, as an errant schoolboy, I was caught out with a load of 303 rifle ammunition on me, which another one of my schoolmates had found at a disused Second World War ammunition dump. Of course, I got sprung, so I was told I had to go to the local police station and hand them in. So I went to the local police station, and who should be on duty but one Sergeant Coppins, who knew me, and he was one of Dad's customers as well. So he asked where I'd got the ammunition from, and I wouldn't tell him. So he said, "Follow me." So he took me down and showed me the cells. And he said, "Well, if you don't tell me, I'm going to put you in one of those cells." He came back and asked me again. I said, "No." So he says, "In the cells." So I spent the afternoon in the police cells. And then he let me out. He says, "What time do you finish school?" And I said, 10 to 4. So he said, "Well, you better get back to school." So that was my introduction
to the police.
A couple of weeks later, he spoke to my father, and he says, "Has your Dave told you I saw him a few weeks ago?" I said, "No. What's he been up to now?" "Oh," he says, "he's a hard little bugger, he is." He said, "I put him in the cells," he said. So he told them the story. He said, normally the mere thought about that, he said the kids had wet their pants. "Not him, not him." And he says, and he wouldn't tell on his mates. And so they had a good laugh. But my mother was absolutely mortified when she heard, because her thought was, "What will the neighbours think?" So anyway, so I actually left school.
So what was your dad's response? Sort of,
well,
did you get a smack or whack from him or nothing?
No, not really. Corporal punishment hadn't. I'd had punishment through my life, and I've got no objections to that. If I was wrong, I was wrong. That was part of life. I certainly didn't go running but I think on reflection, would a police officer what would happen if a police officer did that today? Now, there's one thing which was that was a time when we had respect for law and order. And I think if somebody would have done that today, it would have made the front page of just about every newspaper in the country.
Yeah.
But no, my dad was a very easygoing, within limits. He'd go so far and then stop. But he just passed it on as life. It had been dealt with. Let's move on.
Yep.
So I applied to join the police as a cadet.
So age 18 or thereabouts?
No. I'm 16 and a half. I left school in July 59, and I didn't have a job. And I was waiting to go for an interview up to London. So I went and got myself a job as a roof tiler, or as a labourer for a roof tiler. I later had an interview in October, and I was accepted as a cadet, and I went I left home a week before I was 17, in January 1960. So I went to the Big Smoke,
Yep.
which very few kids where I grew up, they were very parochial, and a lot of people didn't move too far. But of course, I was a wayward child, and I went to the Big Smoke. However, at the age of 16, and as a police cadet,
Yep.
and it certainly, I was near the system. You were more as the T-boy, the gopher, etc., etc. I don't know what I really expected to do. I was sent to Tower Bridge Police Station in Bermondsey, not a high rent area.
What's that mean? A high rent area?
Well, should we say it was working class, industry, commerce, shipping, etc., etc. Basically, a little,
yeah.
not the top end of town, but there were workers. There was a whole. It was a new world to me.
Yeah.
You know, rough and ready would be one way. But I did have the job of going there twice a day and being a lollipop boy, where you held a stop sign and you did the school crossings. So,
All right.
however, I decided that no, not for me at this stage. So on the day that I was 17 and a half, I took the day off. I applied for a day's leave and went to the Central London Army Recruiting Office and signed on in the army. I didn't need my parents' consent.
At 17 and a half.
At 17 and a half.
Yep.
So, from there, I joined.
And they took you on?
Pardon?
They took you on?
They took me on, and I signed on to join the parachute regiment.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because with parachute play, you got an extra 6 shillings a day, so you were better off.
Yeah.
So therefore, I joined the army.
Right. And then, so how long were you in the army for?
There's a history there. I signed on, and I was actually in the army for just over 3 years. There was very much talk at that stage that the police were going to change their process of recruiting, and that they were going to stop adult direct entrance. So by this time, I'm past that stage, and I decided that I would go back into the police. So I left the army. I left on the 30th of August, and I was in the police back on the 2nd of September. I basically just got back from Malaya and went straight back into the police force. In the intervening time, I'd had to go back to the recruit to apply to join the job, be interviewed again, etc., etc., etc.
So while in the army, you went to Malaya. So other
countries, yes.
Yeah.
Cyprus, Greece. I spent 9 months, 10 months in the Persian Gulf, 1990. Probably a lot of people don't, beg your pardon, 1961. A lot of people don't realise, they talk about the Iraq war now, but a lot of people are not aware that the Iraqis were going to go into Kuwait back in 1961. But in those days, they didn't talk about things, and the 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment went into Kuwait, and then we followed. I was in the 3rd Battalion, and we followed in behind them, and we ended up staying in Persian Gulf in Bahrain for 9 months, and then I came back to the UK. Then I went to Greece, and then I went to Malaya.
Right. So, out of the army, back into the police force.
Yes.
As a
a
more mature, more developed, more.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes to all of those.
Yep.
Seen a bit of life.
Yeah. Yep. Travelled the world. I mean, that would be.
Oh yes.
You saw a fair amount of the world up to age 21, which was.
Oh yes, at taxpayers' expense, I might add.
Yeah.
Oh, I went to Aden and Kenya, Malta.
Yeah. Right.
Yep. I'd say that I've been pretty fortunate.
Yeah. Yep.
I've been fortunate. So I was wiser and more worldly when I went back into the police, and I started off as an English bobby, wearing a big hat.
So, what is an English bobby for those that?
Well,
the younger ones have no idea.
I was a police constable, and after I'd finished my basic training at Hendon, at the Metropolitan Police Training School, I got posted to A Division, Cannon Row, which was the police station which looked after the Palace of Westminster, or you probably would know it as the Houses of Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of those helping all the lost tourists. I did duties at 10 Downing Street, Buckingham Palace, all those, shall we say, tourist spots, helping the poor old tourists out. I would say, not my idea of policing at that point in time. But anyway, it was fascinating. I met lots of people from all walks of life.
So at that stage, a bobby, so would you be with another policeman? Like, was there, you're like an apprentice to someone, or you just on your own?
Well, okay, when you join the police, you're on 2 years probation to start off with. Most of the beats were single beats. There were also patrols. Again, where I wasn't the norm. There was a lot of what we call protection posts. So you were doing more protection posts and traffic points, directing, holding up traffic in the middle of Whitehall, all those sort of things. One of the fascinating ones, which what a lot of people probably are not aware of, the traffic lights at Parliament Square outside Parliament House, when the house is switched off and traffic is controlled by a police officer doing point duty to facilitate the passage of the parliamentarians to the house. So again, one of those whole things. So there you are, late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, standing there, nothing happening, but you've got to be standing out in the middle of the street directing traffic. Anyway, but it was all fun. It was all good fun.
So a couple of years there.
Well, no, not a couple of years there. In the intervening years, I'd met this lady who came from Oxford. We got married, and I transferred away from from Cannon Row because I bought a house, or we had bought a house, and I moved to an outer area called Southall. So I was shall we say, more doing a police job out in Southall. And Southall had a very high population of Indians and Pakistanis at that time, which created a whole new raft of social issues. as I said, I had 2 years. I was on 2 years probation, and I'd done about 20 months, and I got approached with my reporting sergeant, and he asked me whether I'd ever thought about joining the CID, the Criminal Investigation Department. And I said, well, I can't do that. I haven't got my 2 years in. He says, well, you've got your 20 months in. What do you think about it? So the thing was, right, in civvies, 9 o'clock Monday morning, see the Detective Chief Inspector at Ealing, and take it from there. So I joined the CID. It was as an aide to CID, which meant that you were still on the uniforms roster, but you were attached to the CID. That changed a bit later, and we were given the title of Temporary Detective Constable. And then we went through a selection again, and I moved to a police station called Uxbridge, and then another one called West Drayton, which is alongside Heathrow Airport. And again, after about 18 months, and again it's a selection process, and you have to be recommended. And I was fortunate enough to go through two selection, a district board and a central board, and I got confirmed as a detective constable as a full-time CID officer. So that meant a transfer. So I then moved to probably the most famous police station in the world, Bow Street Police Station, where the Bow Street runners came from.
So did you have to sell up your house in?
No, not in the UK. I sold up my house when we came to Australia.
Oh, right. So you kept that house.
Yep.
How far away was that to the Bow?
To Bow Street?
Yeah.
Oh, about 12 miles.
Oh, so okay.
There's another. Do you know in England, although they're supposed to have metricated, you buy your fuel by the litre, but you travel by the miles. All signposts are still in miles in the UK because they reckon it was going to cost too much. So the English still talk in miles, even to today.
Yep.
So travel was part and part, but it was a compact area. You know, the Metropolitan Police area was 640 square miles. Okay, so which would be less than half of the area of Fraser Coast Regional Council. Within that area.
Yep.
There was in my days, there would have been about 25,000 police officers.
In that
600 and odd square miles, yeah.
Wow.
Well, you got the population density.
Yeah, that's right.
We're talking about millions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. So then CID. So worked in some interesting cases, no doubt.
Oh. Possibly, but there was a variety.
Yeah.
A variety, yes. From one end of the spectrum right up to I was very fortunate. I had some pretty good mentors. I had some there were cases, never ever thought of them as interesting, but from minor crimes, all the way through.
So there for how long, roughly?
Just over 5 years.
At Bow Street?
No, Bow Street. I went to Bow Street in 1967 after I'd made full time or permanent CID officer. So I moved there. It would be end of July 67, and I was there till 1968.
So. When did you come to Australia, or was there steps between there and then? You worked for...
steps in what way?
Like moving on from 67. So what time? When did you leave to come to Australia? We'll get to that. But
okay, 68, 20th of October 1968.
So why did you come? Or what was the...
Okay. My son was born in '65. And I guess I was starting to get a feeling that I'd have to say I wasn't too happy with the way things were happening, and I was thinking that, okay, I'd had a good life and I'd had plenty of opportunities, but I was sensing that things were happening, and perhaps my son would not have the same benefits that I had.
Yep.
You know, early '60s, there was a lot of things happening. I loved the job. As a friend of mine said, "You live for the job, but we only are in the job to live." But I could see things were, to me anyway, rightly or wrongly. So I decided to migrate. It was all done over the dinner table one evening after listening to a parliamentary speech, and my response was, "That's it." And Chris said, "Does that mean we're going to Australia?" Yes.
So age 25 with a son.
Yeah.
Here we go, off to Australia.
Yes.
Sell the house.
Yes.
So out of interest, what'd you pay for it and what'd you sell it for?
I bought it in 1964. I paid £5,100. It was a brand new semi.
Yep.
And that was upmarket in that because we had full gas-fired central heating.
So you're up there.
Again, it was money that certainly Chris and I would save together.
Yep.
Because certainly when I was overseas, wasn't much to spend my money on.
No. And then sold it for how much?
For £6,700.
Right. Yep. So then off we come.
Would you know what it's worth now?
Yeah, what would it be worth now? A mil?
At least £750,000.
Pound. Yeah, which is.
Yeah, not a bad return. No, anyway, it's relative.
Yeah,
it would have
right.
to be relative.
Yeah. So put the money, sold the house, put the money, here we come, hop on a ship or a plane or...
No, take a step back. My intentions were to join... Okay. Chris knew some people that had migrated about 10 years previously to Adelaide in South Australia. So she said, well, if we're going to Australia, I'd like to go where there's,
at least someone
at least one person. Yeah. So we decided to migrate to South Australia.
A lot of English people didn't they? I mean... because
well, at that time Elizabeth was being built. There was plenty of jobs. It was a whole new, a new city, etc. It was a planned city. It is still one of the best planned places in Australia, even after 50, 60 odd years.
Yep.
It got a bit of a bad rap with Winching Palms, and I accept that. And I did not want to associate with Winching Palms when I got there, and I've suddenly found that we had more friends that weren't English. There was people that wasn't my intention at all. I'd left the country, new life.
Yep.
But I'd applied to join the South Australian Police. That was my intentions. And I was told that they weren't doing direct recruitment like other states were still doing, but I should wait until I came to migrated and then come and apply then.
Face to face,
and make sure you got your CV in order, etc., etc.
Yep.
So, no, I flew out again. That was we had the option of sailing or flying, and we thought it would be better to fly because being on a ship for 3 to 4 weeks, etc., etc., it makes you think that you're further away than you really, those sort of things. There was a psychological thing then. And the other one was to conserve your money, because there were stories of people that had spent all their money on the boat, when they, etc., etc. So we flew into Sydney, and then flew from Sydney to Adelaide.
Cost of airfares in those days?
I don't know, but it only cost me 10 quid.
You're a £10 pom.
I'm a £10 pom, and in the immortal words of Warren Mitchell, better known as Alf Garnett, it's the best 10 quid's worth he ever knew about. So yes, I've got no qualms about that at all. Yep. And I did my 2 years, so I didn't have to pay the government back. Yeah,
right. That's it. So in Adelaide, ready to enter into the police force, or
well, okay. Obviously, the initial thing, as far as I was concerned, was to get settled, and sorted out. So again, you step back, different things happened. A couple of years previously, when I was at West Drayton, there was an incident that happened involving a uniformed PC. He went and arrested a couple of people, 3 people. And I was the CID officer who was to handle it, and he said, look, I've got a problem. He said, I don't know what's happening, but he said, I'm leaving for Australia on Monday. What do we do? So I said, let's sort it out. So what happened was that these 3 persons obliged me by admitting the offences under caution, so I could deal with them quite quickly on the Monday morning, and this guy by the name of Pete Medhurst could go to Australia. And I'd completely forgotten about it, and about a couple of weeks before I left the police, I bumped into a police who actually knew him. We hadn't seen each other for years. And he mentioned that Pete Medhurst was living in Adelaide, and left it at that. So when I got to South Australia, let's have a look in the phone book. Would you believe he was living about 3 or 4 streets away from where I was?
Yeah, right.
And he was working for a night security company. In those days, it was called Australian Watching Company, which subsequently got took over by other ones. And he remembered me, I remembered him, etc. And we had a long discussion. He said, look, if you want a job, because the thing was, we wanted to get a house, we wanted to get settled. If you haven't got a job, you can't get a mortgage, etc., etc., etc. So I thought, well, this is not a bad idea. So I worked shaking hands with doorknobs 6 nights a week, because it also, so it was a start. So then I could go to the bank and say, I want a loan. So once I'd got the loan, we bought a block of land and we're having a house built. So I then go to number 1 Angus Street, which is the police headquarters in Adelaide. Here I am. Oh, being interviewed by these 2 officers. Oh, well, we're not taking adults right now. And there was a conversation. And I said, hold on, I've come this way. You said this, that. And in the intervening time, the police had changed their policy from taking adults into just taking 17-year-old cadets. One of the officers, you're too old. And as one is talking to me, the other one's looking through my CV. And he said, how many years service have you had? I looked on. He said, do you realise you've done things that a CIB officer, CIB is over here, with 20 years service wouldn't have done? And I said, well, yes, well, all the villains didn't come to Australia in the first place. There's still quite a few over there. Anyway, I couldn't join the South Australian Police Force.
Right.
So what do?
Ooh.
Have a look
Yep.
around. What shall I do now?
Mm.
So I started off in sales. I worked with a company called W&T Avery. That didn't last long, didn't impress me at all. And then there was a real estate firm looking for salesmen that said, we will train you. That's a bit more in my line. So I got into the real estate industry. I got my salesman's license. Then I studied for 12 months and got my agent's or manager's license. And that's embarked on the path in the real estate industry for a number of years.
And Chris, did she work or?
Chris got into what you call now IT back in 1961 when it was called data processing.
Yep.
Whole different ball game.
Yeah. Yep. At the start of that,
it started then.
Industry,
She got into, should we say, the computer industry. She worked for a number of companies. She was teaching computing programming course took about 2 weeks in those days. So when we came to Australia, she got into it. Absolutely mortified. How could a person with a child do what she was doing? And in those days, you remember that there was a definite bias, male-female.
Yeah.
There's an interesting story about that. She applied for a position, and she had signed the letter Chris Barrowcliff. So she went for this interview, and the thing was, you're a woman. They thought Christopher, not Christine. Anyway, what happened, this company, which was a finance company, employed her for the knowledge, and they employed another guy for the trousers. But it was this is 1969, and she was told not to divulge that she would be monthly paid, because that would indicate how much money she was being paid. She was monthly salaried as opposed to fortnightly pay.
Yep.
So things have moved since that time. But Chris was in the computer industry. Except for when family planning went wrong. We decided to have 2 children, but the second one turned out to be 2. So we ended up with twin daughters, so we ended up with 3. So she was a housewife till Lee and Kelly started primary school. So that was her side.
So you did the real estate, and what after the real estate?
Well, it wasn't a case of after. It was all involved with the real estate. It was that I then decided to have a break. I worked for a company again. I was pretty fortunate. There was a development called the West Lakes Development Scheme in Adelaide, particularly it was the converting the tidal swamps of the Port River into a high-rated residential area where they created a man-made lake, etc., etc. And there was a lot of people after the jobs, and I was extremely fortunate. I was one of the first 2 salesmen to work for the West Lakes Development Scheme, which subsequently has been a precursor to many other developments in Australia. It was work hard and play hard. Long hours.
Yeah.
Again, you only get out of it what you put into it. It was really interesting. Trying to convince people, yes, there is going to be a lake here.
Yeah.
You are investing wisely, etc., etc. It was hard work, time consuming.
How much for a block of land and a house back in those days there?
The first blocks of land on the periphery was about $4,000. The first stuff on the ocean side, it's the scheme went from the ocean, St Vincent Gulf, inland, right? So there was lake frontage blocks and there was sea frontage blocks. The first subdivision we're paying from $9,800 to about $10,000. This is by this time we're talking about 1971.
Yep. And to build a house
in those days would be in the region of $14,000 to $15,000. Right. I hate this word average. There was some there was a couple of spec houses which were built. It was a duplex, and they were sold for, which was high in those days, was about $25,000. But the block size, the blocks, as it was progressively developed and dependent on what the location, you were talking more, but it was fully developed. It had encumbrances on it of what you could build and what you couldn't build, etc., etc. So it was a properly planned community. The first lakeside blocks was about the 10 up to 14,000. I bought a block of land overlooking the golf course, and that was about $9,500 at the time.
It's always good when a salesman buys a block.
Yes, but I also sold it.
Yep.
The first managing director was a guy called Laurie Curtis, who I had a tremendous amount of respect for. He'd come through the ranks, so to speak, and he left, and his successor, he and I had a number of differences of views, and probably the straw that broke the camel's back for me was that there was a meeting at the head office, and I'd put in an apology. I said I had some appointments and I couldn't break. And the meeting was about sales haven't been going too well, etc., etc., etc. So I walk into this meeting late. And I apologised, and of course, why, where, what? What have you been doing? And I opened my briefcase and I said, here's 20 contracts. I'd sold 20 blocks of land to a builder with the resale. We was speccing them, and we had the job of selling. So that took the wind out of his sails, but he wouldn't. What was happening, they were releasing it in stages at a time. They were developing a subdivision, and when one was getting close to completion, they would open a new one on. There was a rollover, and he said, well, hold on, those 20, we haven't got hardly anything left to sell. Is that such a bad thing? So, should we say there was a parting of the ways? I thought, no, I don't need this. So, in the meantime, I started to like Port Adelaide. It was on the edges of Port Adelaide, Now, Port Adelaide wasn't really a high rent area also. Again, commercial activity, port activities in those days. But there was the thing called the Lefevre Peninsula, and there was a lot of old houses there in that area. And the house that I'd lived in before I grew up, when I lived in Oxfordshire, was a house which was built in 1710. Old. Walls were about over 2 foot thick, etc., etc., etc. So I got a soft spot for old houses. So I found an old house in a rather run-down state, extremely run-down state. It was in such bad condition that I wouldn't show Chris the house until she'd signed the contract. No, the transfer. Sorry, it wasn't a transfer. I did a nominee contract and until she'd signed the transfer paper. Now, we'd built a brand new house. Again, this is one of the differences between England. A lot of people's ambition in England was to end up with a bungalow. In other words, a single bungalow's got a different meaning in Australia. In England, was a single detached house. So we came to Australia and built a single detached house, and we thought we were the greatest. But there was this old house in a suburb of Port Adelaide called Exeter. So that led me down another path of life's journeys. So I did this and renovated this house. And on renovating that, I ended up, there was an old gentleman that time-served carpenter and joiner lived next door. He was in his 90s, and his son used to come and visit him, Archie, and he died. And then I ended up buying that house. So I ended up buying about 4 houses in the same street, one after another.
To do them up and sell.
Yes.
Yep.
I stuck my neck out. We borrowed money on interest only, temporary finance, something probably a lot of people don't understand in those days. But so that led me down to another path. I got fascinated by renovating old houses and found that there was people who are in the building trade. They were all tuned up for building brand new houses, but not old houses. And I had this old time-served carpenter joiner, the 3rd generation, as a mentor for over 10 years until he died. So then I got approached, well, why don't you do this full time? I wasn't licensed. So I went to TAFE College, got qualified.
Yep.
And got a general builder's license, an open general builder's license. Not only did you have to have tertiary qualifications in South Australia at that time, you had to go through the Builders Licensing Board and go for an interview process. You know, all these guys there and you're standing there. So again, I was fortunate. So I was renovating, and then another friend of mine, again in real estate, said, how about working for me? And I kept on putting it off. So then I got back into the real estate, and I then started to do 2 things. I was renovating houses for myself at that stage.
Yep.
And selling real estate. And it was again, fun times, work hard.
Yep.
You only get what you put into a job.
Yeah. Yep.
I guess it's an ethic. Nobody gave me anything. I don't expect anybody to give me anything.
Yep.
So that was it. So we had this thing of work hard, play hard, and it was interesting. Used to get phone calls. I'd be working on the weekend or something, and they'd say, "I've seen a house on such and such and such. Can we have a look at it?" And I'd say, "Well, yes, I will be there in such and such a time." Now I'd be dressed in a navy blue singlet, work boots, and stubbies. Not your average salesman. I would go to them, please excuse the dress, etc., etc., etc. Not once did anybody complain because I gave them the service,
Yep.
right? And it became a bit of a joke going into the office on a Monday morning with going, oh God, he's got his selling gear on again. And there was another guy there that was always immaculately dressed. And his wife used to dress him. She used to put out his clothes every morning and all the rest of it. A guy called Keith Lang, we commonly called Clang. And people would ring him up on a weekend, and he said, I'll be there. And he'd go in, he'd shower, change, get dressed and all the rest of it, and he'd go to, and the people had left. So it became a bit of, oh God, he's got his, and again, it's one of those things, it's not the dress, it's the person in the dress, right? Yep. Just one of those things. Yep. That, again, it's one of those things. But I got involved with lots of things during that time. As I said, we moved down to Port, then we moved to Semaphore, which was the next suburb. I become part of that community. I believe that you have to be an active member of your community. I got approached and I was asked to join the local community hospital board.
Yep.
And I was on the board for 10 or 11 years. I was chairman for 3. This is in the late 76 to 80 something. It was rather an interesting time because this was when, should we say, Medibank Mark 1, the whole health system was being altered, etc.
Yep.
Port Adelaide, a lot of people had their health thing, and it was their hospital. It was created back in, it was a converted house to extended, right? It had 35, and when I joined, it's 35-bed hospital. It did maternity, general, surgical, etc. And the locals looked at it as their local hospital. No, I guess I was burning candles at both ends. I was on that.
Yep.
I was then teaching part-time for WA about buying and financing homes, contracts, contract law, renovating. So for quite a number of years, it was full on what I enjoyed. Again, work hard, play hard. So that was it. And brought up 3 kids.
So when was the move to up this way to Maryborough? Was it to Maryborough?
No, there was a step. We'd always we first came to Australia in about Queensland. A friend that Chris had worked with moved up here, and we got invited to the wedding. And we first came up here to Brisbane in 1980. Actually, we came to Maryborough. We had a bit of a swan, but it was in the winter, and we liked the climate. And we were saying, okay, when the kids get off their hands, why not? So mid-90s, we moved to Brisbane. Chris.
So sold up everything down there and moved up, or?
Yep. Oh, moving's an integral part of our life. When we talk about how many houses and moves we've made in our life, I think at the last count it was about 11 or 12. But anyway, but no, Chris got in IT in the public service, and then when she retired, there was no need to live in Brisbane.
Yep.
What was said at that time, or more particularly Chris, or want to be within an hour and a half's drive of an airport, so I could fly down to South Australia. All my kids I said I've got a son and 2 daughters, and we have 5 granddaughters. So there's nobody to pass the family name on in Australia. So she would want her grandmother figs. I must admit, most people, the kids leave home and leave the parents behind. We did the opposite.
Yeah.
The parents moved and left the kids behind.
So they're all still in Adelaide?
They're still in Adelaide. So Chris wanted to be able to fly down and get her grandmother fix.
Mm-hmm.
So we were looking around, and we were sorting things out. Where should we live? And at that time, Maryborough wasn't in the picture because it was too far away. And I had a friend of mine from South Australia, a builder friend of mine, come to stay with us when we were living in Brisbane. We were living in Brisbane at the time. We lived in renovating old houses was basically part of what I was doing so much, because it's a totally different ball game, renovating and restoration as opposed to building, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
And people don't know there's also a difference between renovation and restoration, 2 different things. Well, anyway, this friend came to stay with us, and he'd been staying at Hervey Bay, and he just handed me the Chronicle. Oh, here's the local paper. And the front page was that Virgin were going to come into Hervey Bay.
Oh, that's right.
So, hold on. We fly from Hervey Bay to Sydney. It said, a whole different ball game. So, we widened the horizons. We came up to Maryborough. And we bought.
In what year?
2000. We bought in 2005, December 2005. Settlement was on the 31st of March 2006, and I came up on the night of the 31st, and Chris came up on All Fool's Day, April the 1st, 2006. There's a guy that we went to school. We lost contact with each other. I went in the army. He went into the Air Force. We lost contact with each other. It turned out that he migrated to Australia, and he lives at Redcliffe. And of course, I didn't meet up with him again till the mid-90s, when we moved up to Brisbane. And one of the things he said, you know, when we're talking about things, and he said, we are the last generation that have freedom. And he says, just think about it. I said, yeah. I said, we only had, as kids, we only basically had 2 times, mealtime and bedtime. Our parents didn't worry particularly unduly about what we did. Now, again, so it's right.
Yeah.
So you've got to ask yourself, what has changed? How has society changed, etc.? I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't think any.
But it has.
Pardon?
It has changed.
Yes, but I don't think, fortunately, one of the benefits here is Maryborough hasn't changed sufficiently. As I said, kids walking down from St Helens, I noticed they put in a footpath there, but seeing the kids walking there to school, riding their bikes and all those sort of things, you know, it's part of a community, you know.
Well, I know for yourself also that, you know, it's 5 minutes walk down to the Brolga, where you've got a cultural centre.
Again, that is something. Again, that is something which is underestimated.
Yeah.
Or Chris can drive. She says she can do every supermarket in Brisbane, in Maryborough, and being home, and only have done 5k. Now you try and do that in Hervey Bay and any other place. You know.
Yep.
So okay, we've moved here.
Yep.
We enjoy it here. It's got a good community.
Mm.
Probably, unfortunately, the community is not kept up to speed on a lot of things which are happening within the local community for a number of reasons, media, etc., etc.
Mm.
But to us, it doesn't probably wouldn't suit everybody.
No.
But we've lived in cities, and all these sort of things. And when we compare,
Yeah. This is pretty good.
yes,
Yep.
it is simple. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's
So you're so we're at the current where you're a concerned citizen with some of the things that do go on here, that you're looking for a better way within the current establishments.
well. I think there's basically a couple of ways you can look at it. You can be quiet and do nothing,
Yep.
or if you see things that you're not happy with, that's in some respects it's a bit like the difference between the political process in the UK and Australia. In the UK, you don't have to vote. In Australia, at least it's compulsory that you attend a polling station. You don't have to vote, but so if you're not party, how can you be put yourself into a position?
Yep.
So here we've got everybody that votes for local elections, state elections, federal elections, or at least right. So a lot of people, you either keep your mouth shut, don't just criticise and moan. That doesn't get you anywhere.
Yep.
I guess it depends on what you think about your community.
Yep.
A councillor once said to me, he says, well, the locals don't worry as long as their dustbins are emptied and water comes out of the tap.
Yeah.
Now, I don't subscribe to that in as much as if that's the attitude of a councillor, he shouldn't be a councillor.
Yeah.
And I think there's got to be, the community should be more proactive. But I think some of the issues they raise are very minor, but they seem, the minor ones get more of a headline than the underlying ones.
Yeah.
I think if I put it, you can put it in a couple of words, we're really talking about governance of local government. Now, we've got 3 tiers of government, but it is local government which is the closest to a community.
Yeah.
The decision makers in Canberra are totally detached from what's happening on the Fraser Coast.
Yep.
The same happens state-wise. Everything revolves around 1 William Street, and you know, the joke is that they wouldn't have a clue what's happens really north of Pine Rivers. You know, so from a local point of view, it is even more important that people are aware. And unfortunately, we have a bad communication system. A lot of it is miscommunication.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of people don't understand the system. And we also have what I call abuse of position, where people use or abuse or misuse their position of title or status.
Yeah.
So that's a negative. We've got positives. It's to get rid of this negativeness or negativity, which is detrimental to this community. and until there are better levels to the community. They talk about consultation, but there is none, or extremely little. Just having a look, I guess I focus a lot on legislation. I look at things closely, I read things, and I cannot see how a councillor can make a valued judgment decision when he only gets the council agenda less than a week or 2 days. By law, he only has to have the agenda 2 days before a council meeting. I fail to see how he can read and understand something like frequently 600 or 700 pages, not communicate with the community, which he's supposed to do. Remember the principles of local government. The principles of local government cannot be complied with as we are today.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, we have councillors that won't say, hold off, let this matter lay on the table, and let's do our homework.
Yep.
Yes, I'm very critical of this local council for very valid reasons. And I'm certainly not popular in Tavistock Street.
No.
But I'm not here to win a popularity poll. Again, that's another one of these issues. We've now got a situation where it's about personalities as opposed to policy.
Yeah.
That's critical. Forget the personalities. I couldn't care whether a person is black, white, brindle, got 2 heads, or whatever. It's whether they are competent and able to discharge their responsibilities.
Yeah. Yep.
And that is critical. And we don't have people administratively or electively that are functioning properly if you really drill down. I can't put it any
No, that's well
better.
said. I think so. I'd really like to say thank you. I'm sure there's going to be more discussion as we go on with these conversations, to drill down then locally. That's what we look forward to in the future. But it's been a great experience just chatting with you today, because you build in the background. I mean, your attention to detail of these dates and things that are so clear in your head, really is attention to detail versus the frustration where within council there's not a lot of attention to detail, but there needs to be more so that this community can then grow and be a better place, and that's what we're all on about. It's great to see that you've come from there to here, and you know what you're on about. So keep up the good work.